Welcome back to the table, friends. I'm your humble host, GreyDMs, and with me as always is Owen.
Hello.
Once again, we're meeting to sit around the table and discuss a fun and interesting topic that I am going to let Owen take, and I'm going to sit back and see if he can teach me something.
Okay. My apologies, but you're going to have to listen to this. So, Howard Phillips Lovecraft was born in 1890 in Providence, Rhode Island. He had a troubled childhood marked by tragedy, including the mental illness and institutionalization of his father and the later death of his mother. These early experiences with isolation, loss, and psychological instability would influence his writing, particularly his obsession with human frailty and madness. As a child, Lovecraft was highly intelligent but reclusive, developing an intense love for classic literature, history, and astronomy. He became deeply interested in the works of authors such as Edgar Allan Poe, Lord Dunsany, and Ambrose Bierce, whose influence can be seen in his later writing. Despite his literary talent, Lovecraft struggled with poverty and poor self-confidence, which prevented him from achieving mainstream success during his lifetime. Most of his work was published in pulp magazines like Weird Tales, and he was largely unknown outside of the small circle of writers he corresponded with. However, his ideas and mythos spread throughout his network, influencing later generations of horror writers. Lovecraft died in 1937, largely unrecognized, but his influence would grow exponentially in the following decades.
Isn't that weird? Especially there's a couple painters, famous painters, the same thing happened to, where they spent their entire life in obscurity creating these things that have gone on and held the test of time, but during their life, no one gave a crap.
Yeah, Van Gogh was a big one. His issues with mental instability partially stemmed from his inability to gain any success with painting. And then once he dies, that guy died. His shit was actually really good.
I always wondered if Kevin Smith was always a hair's breadth away from that. Because if you watch...
Are you saying he needs to die?
No. He was a hair's breadth away from dying.
He was. I think he's doing a lot better now.
If you go back and you look at his catalog, he was always pitching 10 years too early.
Yeah, he was.
And I wonder if he was because modern time advances so quickly in our social change, if that's what stopped that from happening.
Maybe.
But if he had been in a different situation, if he would have been one of those people where you're oh my God, this dude's talking about stuff anyway, yeah, you get the idea.
Absolutely. So all of this kind of leads towards the birth of something new, and that is cosmic horror. So cosmic horror is sometimes called Lovecraftian horror, and it's a subgenre of horror fiction that emphasizes the unknown, the unknowable, and the insignificance of humanity.
There it is.
So the fear of the unknown. The human mind, naturally it's curious. Certain truths are better left unknown. Cosmic horror often revolves around the dread of what lies beyond human comprehension and the unseen forces and ancient entities and hidden dimensions that are involved in that. The insignificance in a vast universe. So normal horror, where a monster can be confronted, defeated. In cosmic horror, the antagonists that cannot reason with these monsters, they cannot harm these monsters. Humanity is insignificant in the face of these forces. Ants observing a wildfire. It's basically the same thing. Madness. So cosmic truths, these things that these entities are based around, shatter the human psyche. Just knowing them or touching around the edges of it is enough to just destroy a person's sanity. Investigators go insane after they uncover the reality of the mythos, because their mind can't reconcile understanding of the world that they've just walked into. The indifferent or malevolent cosmic entities. So beings that are so alien and yet so significant that they don't even notice humanity exists. They, you know, they're more of a force of nature than, a thing that can be dealt with. So how do you handle that? Where it's just like, hey, go fight the wind. It's like, what do you do? And finally, the corrupting influence of knowledge. So in cosmic horror, the quest for knowledge is inherently dangerous. Those who delve too deeply into the forbidden texts or ancient secrets often lose their sanity, their humanity, or their lives. So what I'm all getting at here is a game called Call of Cthulhu.
Mm-hmm.
And Call of Cthulhu has been around for a pretty good amount of time. So it's a tabletop role-playing game. It's first published by Chaosium in 1981. It's based on the works of H.P. Lovecraft, particularly his short story, The Call of Cthulhu, which introduced the now iconic cosmic horror mythos. Unlike traditional fantasy RPGs that focus on heroic ventures, Call of Cthulhu places players in the roles of ordinary people, scholars, detectives, journalists, and others who stumble upon terrifying and otherworldly horrors beyond human comprehension. The game is driven by investigation, problem solving, and survival rather than combat. It emphasizes atmosphere, mystery, and tension, creating an experience that blends detective fiction with psychological order. So, some of the big takes in Call of Cthulhu: fragile, ordinary characters. Like I said, you're just playing regular, everyday people. You're not playing a warrior. You're not playing a spellcaster. You're not playing a berserker. You're playing Bob, who's a librarian.
Not Bob Tremere.
Not Bob Tremere. That's a different guy. That's a distant cousin. That's Robert. That's Robert Tremere. But yeah, so these people are going to have to rely on their intelligence, their resourcefulness, and sometimes just luck to survive. Emphasis on investigation over combat. So you've got D&D, which for the most part can be a tactical battle. If you're playing with miniatures and stuff like that, you've got a map. You're looking at how many squares am I away from this? Can I charge? Can my spell cast this far? Do I have line of sight? All that stuff. Call of Cthulhu, it's research, clue gathering, uncovering mysteries, and confronting the creatures is just a bad idea. It's pretty much you're dead. You have in this game sanity. So the game introduces the system where exposure to these supernatural entities and the mythos behind them causes you to become paranoid, become disillusioned, and eventually you literally go insane. So, where a normal game like D&D, you have hit points or stamina or something like that, sanity loss is the breakdown of your mind, and Call of Cthulhu's version of health. Really cool thing about it, you can't get it back. Once it's gone, it's gone. It's fatalistic. Players in D&D, for example, become legendary heroes. They change the world around them. They go on these grand adventures. They're well known. They're lauded by their peers. Call of Cthulhu, yeah, you probably aren't going to make it through this. The theme here is cosmic horror. It dictates that no matter how much a player learns, prepares, they can never truly defeat the unknowable force. They can just hold the tide back a little bit longer. And it's open-ended. So, a lot of the scenarios are structured like a detective story where the player needs to gather the information, connect the clues, make the choices to shape the outcome. And then there's might not just be a single way to win or a correct way to win. It's just what you do to try to get there. So that's a little bit of backstory on it. Let's talk about some of the people that made it. So first off, we've got Greg Stafford. He was born in 1948, grew up with a passion for mythology, storytelling, world building. He was really captivated by the myths and folklore of, particular cultures around him, gods, heroes, cosmic struggles. Traditional Western fantasy of the time was like Tolkien. So, you had, elves, dwarfs, all that stuff. So he wasn't too big into that. He was more into indigenous cultures, ancient civilizations, and the complexities of human belief system. So with his love of storytelling, he created a world, a setting, basically, called Glorantha. And it was a high fantasy setting. It was unique in its use of mythology and deep lore. So rather than following traditional Tolkien-inspired fantasy, Glorantha was shaped by Stafford's studies of anthropology, mythology, and comparative religion. So in 1975, he founded Chaosium, and he used it as a publisher for his war game, White Bear and Red Moon, set in Glorantha. So even though they jumped into this, feet first and everything, they decided they needed a little bit different view of, tabletop RPGs and everybody else. He wanted it to be more than just a tactical combat simulator. It should be more immersive storytelling experiences. I believe game mechanics should support narrative and roleplay rather than just be statistics and combat efficiency.
I love how as we research these, we keep hearing that same thing being said.
Yeah, it's like that was the only thing.
Yeah, because Advanced D&D was so ubiquitous that everybody's oh, we need a game that focuses on storytelling instead of kicking. And you're like,
but all these games came out around the same time, so for them, this is groundbreaking.
Yeah, it's just a weird way of looking back, and it makes sense.
And it's funny because I guarantee you look at any modern day, TTRPG that's coming out, and they're gonna say a lot of the same things. They're gonna say things like player agency, where the choices had real consequences.
You want the players to feel. I wish we could put all of that stuff in Chat GPT and say tell me the opposite. I'm gonna make that game. Read no choices. Players do not have agency. It only focuses on tactical combat. It's not even tactical combat.
It's gonna be it sounds like you want to play Chutes and Ladders. So, all right, with these principles, I developed a game called RuneQuest.
Oh.
And some people may have heard of that. It's been around since the late 70s. It's an RPG set in Glorantha that introduced the basic role-playing system, BRP. So unlike Dungeons & Dragons, RuneQuest used a percentile-based skill system, making it more grounded and intuitive than level-based progression. The system became the foundation for Call of Cthulhu and many other RPGs.
I got a gripe.
Okay.
I don't understand this, and maybe someone can explain it to me. In a percentile system, doesn't the second dice matter only 10% of the time?
Yeah. So, yeah.
It feels like it's such a weird thing to be it's not a D10 system where it's just a 10%, 20, but we have to put that second digit in, which only comes in 10% of the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
That always bugged me. I was like, dude, just make a D10 system. Why wait? I'm like, well, it's a percentage, so it's more accurate.
Well, I mean, they used a D100, and it was basically your percentile. You had to roll below it.
They ignore the second dice most of the time.
Yes, they do.
This just feels very much like actually, I need to see the second dice roll here. Yeah. Oh, I know it's a 40 and you rolled a 6 on the first one, but I want to see because
Well, I honestly, yes, you're right. In many situations that would be the case, but I also think at the same time, because it's a D100, it feels more grand, I guess.
And some of them they have magnitudes of success, correct? So they probably need to.
We'll get into that too.
Yeah, it's just a personal thing. Where it always just felt like grandstanding. It's just but this is a percentile.
Yeah. Anyway. Well, I mean, they had to distinguish themselves somehow. They couldn't do it like D&D. So Stafford didn't design Call of Cthulhu directly. He played a crucial role in its development, though. So in 1980, Chaosium,
not to be confused with Chaosium.
Chaosium sought to expand beyond fantasy RPGs, and Sandy Peterson pitched the idea of a horror RPG based on H.P. Lovecraft's work, and Stafford immediately saw its potential. So let's get into Sandy a little bit. So, Carl Sanford, Jocelyn Peterson.
That's a journey.
But everybody just calls him Sandy Peterson.
Okay.
He was born in 1955. He was fascinated by horror stories, monsters, mythology. As a teenager, he discovered H.P. Lovecraft, and the author's story had a profound impact on his imagination. Peterson pursued a degree in zoology at Brigham Young University, and his knowledge of biology and natural sciences later influenced his approach to designing eldritch creatures, ensuring that Lovecraft's monsters felt alien, yet grounded in some form of scientific logic. Like many games designers of the era, Peterson started off with Dungeons & Dragons, but found the fantasy RPGs lacked true horror elements, which I agree with. He felt that standard RPG mechanics focused on combat and power progression were at odds with the themes of fear and vulnerability that define Lovecraftian horror. One thing I disagree with is you walk into a room and there's an elder dragon standing there, and you realize the DM is like, yes, you have to fight this. There is fear there. May not be horror, but there's fear there.
That's a good point. There is a distinction between fear and horror that only really matters sometimes.
Yes.
But when it does matter, it matters.
So he became involved in game writing. He contributed to magazines like The Space Gamer and eventually worked with Chaosium on RuneQuest. However, his true breakthrough came when he pitched the idea for the Lovecraftian horror RPG. So in 1980, Peterson was hired by Chaosium to develop what would become Call of Cthulhu. His design philosophy revolved around 4 key ideas. Investigation over combat. Players would solve mysteries rather than fight battles. Fighting a cosmic horror would be suicide, so knowledge, preparation, and creativity were emphasized. Sanity as a core mechanic. Inspired by Lovecraft's themes of mental collapse, Peterson introduced sanity points, which would erode over time as characters encountered eldritch horrors. Ordinary people as protagonists. Instead of warriors and wizards, players took on the roles of scholars, detective, and journalists, making them more relatable and vulnerable. Sense of cosmic dread. The game was not about winning. Players would often uncover terrifying truths that they could never fully understand, reinforce the insignificance of humanity. Results was a radically different RPG experience, and Call of Cthulhu was published in 1981 to critical and commercial success. You also have one other guy here, Lynn Willis. He was a game designer and developer who played a crucial role in refining Call of Cthulhu after its release. Originally a war game designer, Willis joined Chaosium in the late 1970s, contributing to games such as RuneQuest. Refining and expanding Call of Cthulhu was kind of his purpose. He became its primary developer, overseeing rule expansions, source books, and new editions. His main contributions were expanding the basic role-playing system, making it more refined, editing and balancing new additions, ensuring that Call of Cthulhu maintained its tone, mechanics, and atmosphere, and developing scenario books and campaign settings, which became critical to the game's long-term popularity. So let's talk a little bit about Chaosium. So they quickly became known for high production values, innovative game mechanics, and deep storytelling elements. Instead of following market trends, Chaosium prioritized artistic and creative vision, often producing games with unique settings and systems that were distinct from mainstream fantasy RPGs. By the 1980s, Chaosium had grown significantly, expanding into multiple RPG lines. It was during this time that Call of Cthulhu was developed and published, becoming one of Chaosium's most successful and enduring games. So the company produced several critically acclaimed RPGs beyond just RuneQuest and Call of Cthulhu. They had Stormbringer in 1981, which is an RPG based on Michael Moorcock's Elric and Melonbone series, featuring a dark, chaotic fantasy setting that stood in contrast to D&D's traditional high fantasy approach. Pendragon in 1985, an Arthurian RPG designed to focus on chivalry, generational storytelling, and moral dilemmas, making it a unique experience compared to traditional RPGs. Hawkmoon in 1986, another RPG set in Moorcock's Eternal Champion universe, featuring a post-apocalyptic fantasy-infused setting. So Chaosium basically established themselves as a publisher that pushed boundaries in RPG design, focusing on rich settings, immersive role-playing mechanics, instead of just combat. A lot of their systems influenced other RPG developers and would adapt into multiple genres beyond fantasy. So despite all of this innovation and success, They had some issues. Faced challenges competing against, market dominance from TSR, the original creators, owners, publishers, whatever you want to say, of D&D, and they controlled a lot of the RPG industry during the 1980s. So as the 90s began, Call of Cthulhu was still very popular. RuneQuest remained very well regarded, but they faced some financial issues due to mismanagement, market shifts, rising costs of game production. At the time, the role-playing market was shrinking. Collectible card games were becoming very popular. A couple of you have probably heard of Magic the Gathering. It had some popularity in the 90s. They also lost the rights to RuneQuest. So the rights were acquired by Avalon Hill in 1984. Basically, Chaosium was struggling in the 80s. They needed some outside support. They needed some influx of money. So they entered into a licensing agreement with Avalon Hill, larger gaming publisher known for a lot of war games, and they were going to produce and distribute RuneQuest under that agreement. So Avalon Hill basically, they made some major changes to RuneQuest. The main mechanics, some of the lore, things like that. Their third edition, when it came out in 87, was very poorly received. Longtime fans were just not happy with it. Plus, Avalon Hill had very little experience marketing RPGs at the time. They failed to support the game properly, and sales just completely tanked. And by the mid-90s, they stopped publishing new material for RuneQuest. They just let the game go, let it be in limbo. And Chaosium was still struggling, so they couldn't reclaim the rights. And then 1998, Hasbro acquired Avalon Hill. So that made it even more difficult. They tried expanding into fiction publishing, but didn't generate the money that they needed. And by the late 90s and early 2000s, they were in some serious financial trouble. Call of Cthulhu was still successful. They were still making money off of it, but it just wasn't enough. They had some internal disputes, some key departures. The original creative team ended up leaving. Yeah. RuneQuest ended up getting passed between multiple publishers. Chaosium had no control over it whatsoever. There was a modern era spin-off called Delta Green. This is for Call of Cthulhu. It was developed independently by pagan publishers, but it remained, rooted in Chaosium mythos. And then games like Vampire the Masquerade came out, maybe not heavily inspired, but partially inspired, by similar horror elements, but that cut into their market even more. And Call of Cthulhu, lost even more of the market. So Greg Stafford ended up leaving the company. Chaosium's future was completely uncertain. Much of the 2000s, it struggled to remain relevant at all as an RPG maker. So you got a time period where things are going kind of bad, but then you get 2015. Call of Cthulhu continued to be one of the best-selling RPGs. It wasn't until 2015 that Chaosium experienced a true revival. Greg Stafford and Sandy Pearson returned to the company. They helped to restructure it, basically trying to make it profitable again. They somehow managed to reacquire the rights to RuneQuest. They launched the 7th edition of Call of Cthulhu, which we'll talk about the editions a little bit later. But that was a modernization of the system to bring it more in line with playing styles of the time period. And then they also started 2 publishing ventures for more board games. They did end up really getting into Kickstarter. Yeah, so they started using that to help fund new projects. They secured some financial stability. Some of their, later projects were a re-release of RuneQuest, role-playing in Glorantha, and the Pulp Cthulhu expansion. And, they're still there. They're still making stuff.
Seems like there's something poignant about the caretakers of Lovecraftian horror getting into Kickstarter. I don't know. There's something there. I can't put my finger on it. Maybe to know anymore is madness.
The fear of the unknown. Will this Kickstarter survive? Will it make its goal? Don't know.
Tendrils of the beast that sleeps. I don't know.
I mean, if you really think about it, Kickstarter is, the tendrils of madness. Every time you're like, oh, that looks interesting. Oh, here's 80 other things that look interesting. What have I found? What have I done?
Hey, the Kickstarter you backed these other Kickstarters. The cycle goes down.
All right. So let's talk about the cultural impact of cosmic horror a little bit. So unlike traditional horror, which often involves clear antagonists that can't be defeated, cosmic horror is indifferent, unknowable forces, can't be reasoned with or anything. Some films that may, draw some inspiration. The Thing from 1982. First time I saw that, terrified. Grey knows this. I do not like body horror that much, and The Thing is terrible. I don't like it. Alien, 1979, very similar. Stuck in space with an unknowable creature, hunting you. Uses you as its incubator. I mean, it's right there. Another one that I thoroughly enjoyed, but also hate at the same time, Event Horizon, 1997.
Yeah. Like Event Horizon, so about like it as a horror movie, it really got to me. It was came out a good time, but it had that element that I think you touched on earlier, where in your head, even if the heroes get away, for the rest of their lives, they're going to know that thing's out there.
Yeah.
I think that was the essence of.
Yeah, it really is. Like, you might get away, you might go home, you get in your comfortable bed to go to sleep at night, but every time you close your eyes, like, it's still there.
Yeah, that's
Mm-hmm. And one of my favorites, The Mist.
Yes.
If you have not seen The Mist, 2007, very excellent movie. Yeah, even Stephen King, who wrote the original story, said the movie was fantastic.
All I can think about is that TV. I don't know if it was like a short, like part of a show short, or if it was just a YouTube short, where the dude's talking about seeing the pig walk into his house.
No, I don't know what you're talking about.
You ever see?
No.
It's like flipping out. He's like, that exists.
Oh, yeah. That was, what is his name? He exists.
Like, I have to live in a world where that thing can walk in here at any point. Yeah, talk about Cthulhu cosmic horror.
Yeah, I mean, it's... Oh, man. Yeah, that's
all I can think about. You're talking about
it's just a pig with a Richard Nixon mask on. Yeah.
Anyway.
I lost my train of thought here. All right, yeah. So, again, just touching back, those are all movies that feature protagonists uncovering horrifying truths that they are powerless to stop. So, the urge to roleplay horror. So, Dungeons and Dragons focuses on a power fantasy. Characters grow stronger, overcome obstacles, and defeat villains. Call of Cthulhu flips the dynamic. Again, you're just ordinary people. Combat is not the solution. Survival is victory. Escaping an eldritch horror or preventing a catastrophe, even at great personal cost, is often the best outcome. This powerlessness makes horror feel real, forcing players to rely on intelligence, caution, and problem solving rather than brute strength. So, why is Call of Cthulhu different from other RPGs? The game encourages paranoia and caution. The more players learn, the more danger they're in. Trusting the wrong NPC or investigating too deeply can spell doom. Unlike other RPGs where exploring everything is rewarded, Call of Cthulhu, sometimes running away is the best option. There's no clear good or evil. Some cultists believe they're doing the right thing. Some eldritch beings are not evil. They're just so alien that their existence destroys human minds. And winning often means delaying the inevitable rather than stopping it. And the horror is unavoidable. Like you said, in Event Horizon, you might have gotten away, but it's still there. You can't destroy it. You can't stop it. Somebody else is going to find it and they're going to bring it back out again. So why has the game endured over 40 years? People love to be scared. Fear, paranoia, creeping dread. I mean, it's fun.
And there's something really great, especially about like playing a game with cosmic horror, that you're talking about torturing your character so much, but at the end of the day, you can walk away because it's not real.
Yeah, it's not actually you.
Like that kind of euphoria or catharsis is where you're cutting it off and you're like, oh, glad that's not me.
That got a little too close, but I could just put the paper down and walk away. Yep. But yeah, the urge to fight an unwinnable fight, but still go down swinging. I mean, it's all fun, but the big thing, at least for me in a situation like this, is the great mystery, finding out what's really going on. And sometimes you have, so like I said, learning is a double-edged sword. You learn about the creature, you learn about its weaknesses, but at the same time, that's slowly chipping away at your sanity. So it's like, what do you do? What's the trade-off? So let's get into the system a little bit. So like I said, it's the basic role-playing system, BRP. It's a percentile dice system, D100. So instead of rolling dice to determine if a character succeeds based on levels or abilities, player roll against a specific skill, making every action feel grounded and realistic. However, Grey doesn't like that.
The percentile dice mechanic feels pompous to me. It feels like it could be reduced. Feels like
this dice system feels pompous.
It does. Like it could just be a D10, and like 90% of the time it wouldn't matter. That's why I said I just think it could have been a D10, right? There's like, I want to throw this extra dice 9 times out of 10, and it'll never have a bearing on anything. But if I don't throw it, technically I'm not throwing a D100, right? Like that's what I said. It just
all right, Grey, you figured it out. It's all big dice. They just want you to buy one more dice.
It's just, ever since it took one game. It was the trial of the stupid Space Marine game. It took one game. I was rolling. I'm like, why am I rolling the second dice? I don't need to roll this dice. This is dumb. It's like, just don't. It's like, I want more nuance because 1 out of 10 times I need to actually check this second dice. So no, okay, whatever. Meh.
It's okay. It's okay. Who hurt you?
It was big dice.
It was big dice. Let me say, you have many bags of dice. I think big dice has your number. They've got you figured out.
Big dice is just like, hey, sweet child, don't bring up this opinion.
These ones are specially calibrated in a machine. All right, so key features, skill-based progression. So instead of levels, characters improve by increasing their individual skills through use and experience. Percentile rolls, each skill is assigned a percentage value and success is determined by rolling under that number. Degrees of success and failure. Rolls can result in critical success, regular success, failure, or fumbles, allowing for a wide range of outcomes. There's no character classes. Players build their investigators with relevant skills rather than choosing a predefined role. That I actually really like.
Yeah.
I many times. That's one of the things I like about Vampire. Even though you're picking a clan, you're technically not picking a job.
Yeah, you're picking recommendations.
Yeah.
Not like an adherence to a path.
Yeah. Investigation and research are key gameplay mechanics, gathering clues, library use and research, piecing together the truths, and you have to interpret the clues to correctly jump to the wrong conclusion. But yeah, you have to do all these things, and all of these things are detrimental to you. There's nothing good about doing anything. If you in real life find yourself in a Cthulhian cosmic horror situation, just leave. How sanity works. So players begin with a sanity score derived from their power stat. Losing sanity is caused by exposure to terrifying creatures, reading forbidden knowledge, or witnessing unnatural events cause the sanity to drop. So you have temporary insanity, a short-term breakdown lasting minutes or hours where the character may suffer from paranoia, hallucinations, or uncontrollable fear. Indefinite insanity, if a character loses 20% of their starting sanity in one game session, they develop a long-term mental disorder. And permanent insanity. So if you reach 0 sanity, your character's completely irreversibly lost in the madness. Characters do not grow stronger over time; they just slowly break down. And the DM just gets to watch that happen and be the cause of it.
Much as life.
The game forces players to balance knowledge and survival. Learning too much mythos drive your character crazy. So, like I said, combat not a good idea. Alternate strategies: run away, use the knowledge against enemies, and leverage allies, convincing others, police, scholars, cultists, to do the dangerous work instead.
Now we have the key.
Yes. So there is magic in Call of Cthulhu, but magic isn't a tool, it's a forbidden, corrupting force.
Yeah.
So spells exist, but they have a price. So unlike other RPGs where magic is a useful tool, casting spells usually leads to horrific consequences in Call of Cthulhu. Sanity loss, using magic warps the mind, pushing the caster closer to madness. Health sacrifice, some spells require a blood ritual or physical damage to be cast. And then unintended consequences. Many spells will draw attention from eldritch beings or create problems worse than the original threat. So every time you cast Fireball, a bigger fireball happens to be cast on you, or it's like wild magic, I guess, would be a good example, though, and a much lower threat.
Yeah, I like to think about it as like you're playing with your friends in the front yard, and your friend's like, "Oh, I'm gonna go get Dad's power drill." It's like, but there's always a chance that Dad's gonna come outside.
Yeah. What's that sound?
Everybody's.
So characters can learn spells through forbidden books, but the game heavily discourages the use. Many investigators realize the price of magic is too high, and it's just not a good idea. Character death is common. That's the point. There's no plot armor. You just you're not the hero of the story. You're just the person involved in the story. So you're probably going to die. The best thing you can do is die in a meaningful way. So you sacrifice yourself in the finale, some desperate moment where you have to make this impossible choice that doesn't stop the inevitable, but it might slow it down and allow others to have the chance to go farther and do what needs to be done. Mm-hmm. But I mean, that's just, you're gonna have some short-lived characters, but you do it right, they go down in a blaze of glory. I mean, that's the cool.
It's a thing that I think is very difficult for role players to get their head around, and like myself included, I feel it because it's very difficult to realize that like you're trying to achieve the greatest story, not the greatest outcome,
right?
And like this is one of those cases where like it's like the story can be amazing, but understand that we're telling a story where the individual character outcomes are probably not good,
right? And I mean, that's fun. Like I like that more than, and then they live happily ever after. I mean, I don't see the point in that. Like another game campaign that we have that I've talked to you about, like I've already plotted that character's death. Like I expect it, but that's not the point. The point is getting there,
exactly.
And it's fun. Like I don't know how to explain it. Like people who are just like, the game is only cool if I get to show off how strong I am. Like that's not this game.
So stupid thought here. What is the opposite of cosmic horror?
Shoots and ladders. Like literally no consequences. Roll the dice, see what happens, go.
Anime.
Yeah. Okay.
Punch God in the face.
Yeah.
Like Gurren Lagann.
Become
there
the
is
god.
No mystery. Go all the way up to the top. Face, spiral all the way down. Happy ending. Like that need to like. We're so problematic with this mystery thing. Like I want to make my antagonist.
It's actually funny too, because if you really look at Gurren Lagann, it is cosmic horror, and then they said, nah, fuck this. Because like these gods from another dimension who basically imprisoned and destroyed your society because they're afraid you were going to get too strong showed up. And then you clawed out. You didn't even know they existed. You clawed your way out. You beat the oppressors. You became the thing. And then they're just like, oh yeah, we're just going to destroy you because you're dangerous.
But then you had a season 2.
Then you're in a season 2. Yeah.
Like this is, maybe that's one of the reasons why like trash anime feels good to the soul.
Yeah,
because you're clawing back the horror of reality a little bit. Like,
well, so the way I see it a little bit, so if you're at a gaming table and you make that character, it's cringe. But if you watch somebody else doing it, it's kind of cool, you know?
It's interesting.
Oh. All right. So, yeah. So Legacy, Call of Cthulhu, you know, this was released in 81. It's one of the most influential tabletop RPGs ever made. It's funny because a lot of people that probably feel they're into tabletop gaming have probably never heard of it.
Oh, yeah.
But it is in the top 5.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people like hear about it, but they never have any personal experience or never like are around it. Like it's just a thing out there somewhere.
Right.
Because like Old Man Henderson and like a lot of stuff like that.
Right. Yeah. So here's some expansions that came out. So you had first edition, was 1981. Introduced the sanity mechanic. Second through fourth editions, not a whole lot was done, just refinement to the rules, balancing. Core system basically remained unchanged. Fifth and sixth editions, 1992 and 2004. They introduced more campaign settings, expanded the rules. And then seventh edition came out in 2014. Major overhaul, modernized mechanics while staying true to the original system, making it more accessible to new players. 7th edition, pretty much most widely played version right now. You look at D&D and there's still a lot of people that play 3.5. There's probably still some people out there that play advanced D&D, you know, so yeah.
And then the hidden story, which is then when everybody got really super pissed off about Lovecraft's views on certain topics and decided never to play this game again.
Right.
But its spirit went on in like things like Vansen and Candela Obscura. Like cosmic horror is still alive and well today.
Yep.
If the origins suffered.
Yeah. So there's a couple of spin-offs. Delta Green, modern conspiracy horror RPG. Same Cthulhu mythos while battling secret organizations, cults, and alien threats. Trail of Cthulhu uses the gumshoe system designed to remove the randomness of finding clues, ensuring that players always get essential information but must interpret it correctly. Cthulhu Dark, a rules light RPG focusing entirely on narrative-driven horror, including reducing mechanics to the bare minimum. And then the Yellow King RPG, based on the King in Yellow mythos, blending reality-warping horror with historical and surreal storytelling. Whenever I think about this, it just kind of reminds me of the SCP Foundation and a lot of their stuff because they get into a lot of this stuff. Some of the people that write on that are so freaking amazing, and I wish I had a tenth of the talent that they have. But yeah, like, so some video games: Eternal Darkness, Sanity's Requiem, 2002. They introduced a sanity system in that. Bloodborne, 2005. Gothic horror. A lot of horror, Lovecraft's cosmic horror and sanity-driven storytelling. Darkest Dungeon, turn-based horror game. You had stress and sanity mechanics. Amnesia, The Dark Descent. One's kind of obvious. Yeah. The Sinking City, 2009, open-world detective game. Players uncover Lovecraftian mystery while dealing with mental deterioration. A couple board games as well. Arkham Horror, Eldritch Horror. Mansions of Madness, Cthulhu Wars. Was just to name a few. But yeah, that's mainly Call of Cthulhu for you right there.
A staple of the RPG industry.
Yeah, and I recommend people play it. It's, like I said, it's not D&D. It's not even Vampire. It's more of just an investigation, exploration type game. There is no winning, so you have to get over that really quick. But it's a good game for learning how to do the devil's bargain, I guess, where, you know, what do I get for what I'm going to sacrifice? Is it worth it?
Yeah, I think certain tables, sometimes they need a palate cleanser or like to poke the wound, you know? And like, I think this is a great game for your table to like go through a period where they're like, hey, we're all feeling things and we're all deciding like, we're not sure what we want to do with this. And then you play like a mini Call of Cthulhu campaign. At the end of it, you're like, so you guys want to go play D&D again?
Can we go to the happy place again?
Can I go get a paladin and everything's okay? And my God loves me and I spike
God
stuff.
loves me. The warlock's like, lucky.
Hey man, I branched into the small piece of Call of Cthulhu that's in 5th edition. No. Yeah, I don't know. We've never played it.
No, we haven't.
We have a member of our audience who has, or no, he doesn't have the book yet. I have the book.
You have the book.
He hasn't taken it yet.
Yeah. After 15.
I know, yeah. Who is being primed. I bought the book for him.
Yes.
Like, being primed to eventually be our storyteller when we go down that route.
Just got to get his wife's permission.
Yeah. And so we do hope to explore that, but we've definitely been exposed to the subject matter and like kind of played around with little pieces of it and tried to sprinkle it in. Sometimes I think when we were younger, some of our vampire stuff may have came close, but other stuff was.
I don't think anything really touched, true horror, but unsettling was definitely there.
Yeah, and it's like it's a weird thing, right? Like when you're talking about describing horror to a group of people and you're playing a game, because there is the separation of character and self, it is kind of hard to come up with something, or not to come up with something, but to describe something that their character is now like screwed up about, that they're not going to be kind of dismissive of, like, oh yeah, it's kind of weird.
Yeah.
And you end up either getting a player who's like, they want to have their character run into insanity, so they just bite at something and go crazy with it, or you have them kind of miss the point and be like, think about this, like really think about this. This may have altered the trajectory of your character pretty heavily.
And it's hard to do, I think, when you have players that don't invest in their character.
Oh yeah.
Where it literally is, their character is just the tool they use to play this game instead of it being this thing that they've invested, emotional thought into, just something that is there at the table.
Yeah, like if the character, this is like self-criticism too, if the character begins to be your self-insert way of running around and having a good time, like you don't want to bite deeply into something like that, and you're going to kind of pull out pretty easily. Yeah. So like you need to, most RPGs require the group to be ready to play what it's asking them to play. And I think this is a good example of that.
I think a really good example is something that I am actually really proud of is when we did our special vampire game a year ago, and we had that situation where my character ran into a mage, and you did a few things where I'm just like, crap, this is not good, but I'm already here, so I'm just going to deal with it. And then you're just like, yeah, next thing you know, you're in this hallway, you don't remember anything. And it's one of those things where you saw I was angry.
Yeah.
Because I was just like, oh, that makes me so angry. And then you put me in the situation where you were like, well, you can either play what I asked you to do, or you can be kind of a bitch about it and do whatever. And a switch flicked in my head where I was just like, hey, what are you guys doing here?
Yeah. No, it was exactly, it was, like I said, there's this, like you said perfectly, there's a moment at the table where it was the choice between you struggling with me or you taking advantage of the situation and just having fun with it. And you did, and the party lost their
They lost their minds.
Because they were just like, what? And it was just one of those
You went in first.
Yeah. One of those examples when like you're comfortable enough with the storyteller and you're like, all right, between us, like, I'm not happy that this happened, but like, I'm going to run with what you gave me. We understand. Okay. Now I got to pretend I don't know anything and then sell it very well to everybody. Yeah. So if people are like, wait a second, Grey, I don't think I heard the last 10 minutes, like what was going on? What did he say? And you're like, no, you heard correctly.
Yeah, that was what happened.
That never happened.
Oh, that was good. Watching someone who was unfamiliar with what was happening lose their mind throughout the game was a blast.
I think the thing that I probably would struggle with the most with a game like Call of Cthulhu is kind of going back to the old Hitchcock descriptions of tension, of like suspense.
Yeah.
You know, where he's like, the bomb goes off and everybody dies, you don't have suspense. But if you show the bomb and then you have everybody talk for 10 minutes. And I think you really need to introduce mechanics where like you take a person out of the room and you tell them something.
Yeah.
And then you have to trust that player is not going to turn around and go, well, guys, haha, there's like Cthulhu's outside or like Nyarlathotep's outside. But they're just going to start panicking, you know, and then everybody's like, why are you panicking? They're like, I can't tell you because then it hurts your character. Right. You know, like I am.
Yeah, I think you really need characters or players that, you know, are willing to invest.
Yeah, they're like, I understand what you're asking of me to play this. And to get that full enjoyment out of it, we've all agreed that we're going to kind of feel that out. But yeah, people have done it well. And hopefully you guys will, or tell us about your best stuff too.
Please do.
Jeez. Like I said, this is one of those areas where we don't have the experience. So we would love to hear from people that actually do. And like the kind of awesome craziness that you guys got up to.
Yeah. Yeah, and help me out because I'm currently trying to run a game that is not Call of Cthulhu, but inspired. And, you know, I just need some ideas.
It's subtlety.
Yeah.
It's always subtlety. That little subtle drop where you're like,
Yep.
Uh-oh.
But it's also framed around those events where you drop the subtle hint and no one looks up from what they're doing. And you're like, oh.
That off topic, but that is one problem that I did not know about playing. I did not understand being on the other side is playing someone who shouldn't know something and then you learn it, but you can't show everybody you learned it. So you're just like, oh yeah, we should just continue to walk out of this room. And then you're like, well, I am freaking the hell out in my head. And nobody's getting the enjoyment, including the DM who's staring at me like, is he really flipping it out? You know? Yeah. So
what's that in your hand? Nothing.
But yeah, so million ways to sit around the table and have weird, wacky fun.
Yeah.
All right.
Yep.
Well, with that, I guess this is 2 podcasts that we didn't actually do a character class.
No.
But like, hey,
all right.
We'll get back to it in the next one and
we'll
come up with something good for you guys. So.
Yeah.
All right. See ya.
Bye-bye.